So our exercise today is sunset skies, and we're working with a little more complex design. I'm going to do this in two stages. The first stage is going to be wet and wet, and it will be incorporating the yellows and the oranges, and then I'm going to be leaving some spaces where some of these blues go, maybe not, because that's actually got quite a lot of yellowy orange underneath of there. And then we'll let it dry completely, and then I will come back and I'll paint the blues on it later, and actually probably come back a third time and paint some of these darker patches that are happening in there. But let's start with our yellows and oranges. My water has a little bit of yellowy orange in it. I don't really care because that's what we're going to be painting. I've drawn some of my foreground on here just because I want to keep that somewhat accurate. It's an interesting scene, little street scene there. This is actually a photograph in front of the art center where I normally teach, the Frank Betts Center for the Arts. So get this nice and wet. Make sure I've got a nice little sheen throughout the whole piece. It's dry up there. If I look at it sideways, I can see whether or not I've covered it with water, and then I want to get the water pretty even on there, so I'm working it back and forth to get it even. Where else have I missed? I'm not working really big. This is about a 9 by 12, a little easier to control, and I can get it underneath of the little my viewing thing. Now my sun, I'm presuming, is probably right about behind this tree, so that's going to be my lightest, brightest area. So let's start with the yellow down there, and then we've got some beautiful yellowy orange right up in here. Just go ahead and work some of that across, build it up a little bit. We'll be able to play with this some, and I'm going to be taking this color all the way down and underneath of here. There is one set of headlights that I might want to try and lift out while it's still pretty wet. So let's go ahead and get into oranges again. So we're doing oranges. I don't want to get any of these too thick because yellows and oranges tend to get very clogged looking if you make them too thick. So I was experimenting with this earlier this week, and I really got some sort of overworked looking pieces because I made the oranges too thick. So I'm trying to be a little bit more careful here. And now we're going to go into the reds. I've got two different reds mixed. One is a very peachy red, which we're then going to work up into here. I want to sort of work my way out from yellowy spaces into some of these peachier spaces, and I have the colors somewhat gradually work across. I don't want to overdo this too much or I'll lose some of those lights. I do need to get out into a little more peachy red, so I've got some quinacridone rose, and maybe it's not totally quinacridone rose, maybe it needs to have a little bit yellow mixed with it. And in actuality, that blue up there has a little bit of a feeling of purple to it, so I could do a very thin red all the way up into there and also down into this foreground. Let's get that a little more. And then I want to think about whether that's too dark. Pull it off if it feels a little too dark. And then up in here, let's get a little, take some of this red up into there. Just get a little thin layer of red underneath of where that blue is going to go on. And same within here. This blue is going to go in here, but it's got a purpleness to it. So it's going to be blue coming in through there. Let's just lift a little bit more of this off of here because I don't want it too, but I do like, this is going to be a combination. I like these little spots up in here, so maybe we can just let those come up and find their way. Should I? Let's try something else here. And maybe we can splatter into here right now. I could probably come back and do some of this later too, but some of the splatter with the toothbrush might give a little texture there. Now let's see. This feels like I've gotten a little too dark. Maybe not. Down here, let's blend this. Seeing some sort of ins and outs here. As this starts to dry, I can come in and play with this just a little bit. So it's not quite so wet. It won't move as much when I go to put a little bit thicker paint in here. And let's take this red right on out over there. But I don't want it too dark. Be careful. Oh yeah, that helps. Those be sort of rosy. There's going to be a dark piece that's going to come across through there, but that will happen. Oh, maybe those can get. Shouldn't be too light off of this edge here. The lightness should be right in there. So let me darken this a little bit over in here. This is still relatively wet. There's still a sheen on this as I'm working. Bits and pieces in here. Okay. See if we can get some of these darker places without getting too overworked with it. And a feeling of some of that coming down. Just as long as it's still a little bit damp, I can continue working here, but I'm going to have to quit pretty soon here because it's starting to dry a bit. And once you start getting dry marks, then you're going to get lots of brush marks rather than it blending nicely. And I'm trying to be careful not to do too much because I don't want to lose these beautiful passages that are happening here. Let's let some of that work in there. And then we can maybe darken this just a little more down in here. Now these cars, let me pull this up just a little bit. They're going to have it's going to be dark back behind them, but they have a peachiness to them that's really quite nice. And these cars, those cars, and this car right here on this side of it, these little cars, maybe some there. Okay. Oh, and then there's this reflection that comes down and off of these headlights here. Let's let that come down into there. And I'm going to just, some of that I'm going to lift and let, a lot of that's going to get darker. And then those headlights, let me see if I can do this. What I really need is a Q-tip, and I don't have one here right now, and if I go to get one, it'll be dry before I get back. I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it good. And then those headlights. It's okay if it's a little bit bigger because I can paint back up to there. It's just that I don't want to lose. There, that's that. And these guys here should have their headlights on even if they don't, so let's just give them headlights even though the photograph they don't have their headlights on. These guys are going to have red lights back here. And let's just do a little red glow. This guy here would have red lights. Let's go orange. Let those run down at that slightly damp road. It's between the headlights. Okay. I am going to stop there, let that dry. So I've completely dried my first layer here that had red and orange and yellow on it, and I'm now going to be ready to start putting the blues in. Now I did a little bit of experimenting. I'm not sure how well it's going to show here on the video, but on this one I used a blue that had phthalo blue and ultramarine blue in it. On this one I did ultramarine blue with a little bit of red in it to make it a little bit more purple. And I think the colors come out a little closer to what I had there. I still don't like how some of this worked, but hopefully when we do this, I won't overdo the blues in there. I've got to be careful where I put them because they can quickly and easily turn things sort of muddy. This little bit here was done by dry brush, and then some of these little spots were done by dropping red into the damp blue. So let's play with this and see where it goes. This is a complex painting. It's, you know, one of these things where you know it's never going to come out exactly like the photograph. There's too many variables, but it has some wonderful potential. So let's see what we can do here. This is my mixture of phthalo blue and ultramarine, and I'm thinking I might need a little bit more in my puddle, so let's just mix a little more in there. That's ultramarine going into it. This is phthalo going into it. And I put just a little bit of burnt sienna in here to gray it down. So let me just add a little more burnt sienna to it because it feels like it needs it. And maybe even a little more burnt sienna in there. Yeah, that feels a little bit more like it's a navy blue. One other experiment that I could have done was to maybe use indithrone blue or indigo or even one of the other dark blues. And now, do I want to pre-wet that area, or if I'm going to just come in with fairly wet paint? Let's just come in with fairly wet paint and see how this is going to go. I might have to pre-wet this area, or at least now that I've got it down there, go ahead and wet it some more. Now, there were some spots here on the previous, and that might end up coming up and getting some of that spot. Maybe I should have done more of that when I originally painted it. Now, I want some of these little bits of pink to show, and the only way that's going to happen, let me just get this all the way across the sky here, because if I don't, I'm really going to be in trouble. So I want to get this pretty much in place here. But what I was starting to say is I want to do a little bit of dry brush work here, like what's happened right there. I love this. So that we can get some of those little pink spots left behind. Just taking my brush down real sideways to the page and pushing it across there to try and get some of that dry brush look. liking what's happening with that. I think that's working pretty well. And there's some more of it here at the end. Whoops, that's a little strong there. Take that right off the edge. I don't like that little hard edge there. I don't like that little hard edge. But now this is going to come in, find its way into here. And yeah, dry brush. Dry brush is exactly what we want to do on this whole area down here. This, no, that's going to go solid. But this dry brush stuff is working quite well. Now there's a little bit of blue that's going to come down and in and across here. And that dry brush is working well. Now this should go a little bit darker up there, so let me go ahead and feed a little bit more paint into that area. Get all the way out to those edges so I don't get brush marks. And then as I get down into here, I'm going to just do some dry brush again to finish that off. And some of that's darker, but it's not dark the whole way in, so let's just be careful about taking it too far down. Yeah, that's starting to look good. Okay, so now we have a streak of blue that runs in through here, but it breaks and has some nice, it starts at the edge here. I'm going to just still do this sort of dry brushish. I've got to be careful about how dark that is. Maybe I want a little thinner. Let's just add a little water to that as we bring it across. And there's some beautiful red that I want to leave behind there, so let me just sort of dry brush that in. And then circle back so that I can get this finger. And maybe break that up a little bit with some dry brush on the bottom. I don't want that too solid. We'll just do a little dry brush down in there. Okay, so now let's get some more of this across here. And there's just some interesting shapes, and I just want to keep playing those shapes a little bit. And it's going to work its way out of the page over there. It's a little bit more down below, maybe right down in here. I want to be careful about overdoing this because I think it can get into too much if I'm not careful. Let's just get that edge. And now maybe we can come in, since blue and red work okay together as purple, I might be able to come in with a fairly reddish orange on the top of this. Maybe that's a little too thick. Let's just thin it down a little bit with my brush, without adding a lot of water. Mostly just want to take some of that off. Let that play up there a little further. That's nice, okay. And now let's also try splattering sponging. Let's see, sponging worked fairly well. Let's just drop a little bit of this red up into here to make some of that sort of broken cloud stuff that's happening up there. This is going to push the paint away a little bit, and hopefully, got to be careful about having it. Now, when I experimented with this before, I've got to be careful because it's going to tend to want to. Do I want to come in with a little dark blue? Yeah, let's just drop a little of that blue back in there. It's going to tend to want to push it away and leave white spots behind if I'm not careful. And so I'm just trying to add a little more blue back into there so that it doesn't do that. And I'll come back in with this purple. Magenta might have been a color I could have used. Okay, I think I need to stop with that. Now, maybe we could have a little more of this reddish orange come in and enrichen this area here. feels like it could be a little richer there. And do I dare put that in when it's wet? Probably not. Down in here, now that this is dried some, you can pick up the edges of this, maybe even put some paint over the top of that. Go back into a little orangish red here. That in just a little bit. It's going to make this a little more like dark areas through there. And then there'll be some dark edges on there. Just have to be careful to keep this from looking overworked. See where it's really easy to sort of have too many marks and make it too overworked looking, but we do want to have some of this feeling of interest here. Let's see, what did I do with my sponge? Sponge. It must fall into the floor. Ah, yes it is. Okay, so the sponge has reddish purple on it. Get a little more red there, a little more yellow into that. And let's just try doing a little more sponge work in here. Maybe this, it almost feels like there's rain coming out of some of those clouds. Is it too dark? Maybe. Remember that trick with a slightly damp rag? Taking a little bit of that off because it's maybe a little too much. Okay. Okay. Do we do any more down in here? Yeah, this feels like not this dark though. I need to be a little bit lighter. Yes, that helps to thin it down a little bit. And speaking of thinning it down a little bit, let's just bring a little bit of that purple into here. And then keep these from being too light over here. We've got a dark tree that goes in on top of that. And this area, let's just sort of soften that a little bit. Some of these dark trees are going to come in on top of this later. So, anything else? Oh, that tree there. Yeah, let's just get a little more reddish down in here. Okay, I think I should stop. It's always sort of hard to tell what it's going to look like once the darks get on top of it, but I'm fairly satisfied with that as far as being an interesting looking sky. And I'm afraid if I do too much on it, I'm going to overwork it. And I want to pull just a little tiny bit more of this dry brush on top of here to get some of those, pulling that out into there. Okay, let's stop before I'm sorry. One more little bit of dry brush here. Light little. Maybe we're enriching that just a hair. This is all delicate stuff. Sponge had red on it. Yeah, you can do just a little sponge there. Sponge. Careful. Not too much. Take it off a little bit. Okay. stop. Stop, yes, no. Damp brush here, just lifting a little bit of that back off because that got a bit darker than what I wanted. Okay. We don't want to lose some of this feeling of light that's coming in through these. Now I like what happened with those pink spots that were in that first layer. It could have actually had more of those, couldn't it? And I'll just dry brush here just a tiny bit more. Okay, now I am going to stop. That I'm going to ignore. I don't really care about the telephone poles and the telephone wires. I think those are extra things that don't really matter. But what I do like is that this pole brings this diagonal up here. So I'm going to increase the size of this tree to sort of bring it up into that space to keep the eye moving up into that diagonal. I don't think this one's quite as important. We could throw a bird in there or something if we want to, but I don't think it's quite as important, and I'd rather that this one be a little taller than that one. So the first thing that I want to do here is I want to find these gray areas, which, by the way, I made another photograph from what I had been using. I'd had this one to get the depth of the color of the sunset, but the darks had gotten so dark down in here, it was really hard to see what was going on. So I went back into photos and made a lighter version of the photograph so that I could see some of the detail down in here. So now I need to mix a gray, just sort of looking at values in here. These grays that I'm seeing, the value of the colors on that car are similar to the yellow up here. If we do the little value card on it, yeah, that's about that. And yeah, that yellow is fairly similar. Maybe a hair lighter, not much. So that's probably my lightest value in there. Some of these cars are a little lighter too. These houses are another value or two darker. So that was this one here, so that goes down quite a few more values darker. So it's down about that value. This other car over here, it's about this value here. So we've got a range of values in the dark spaces. We're going to, since we're doing this with blues, these blue grays, I am going to make my gray out of the phthalo blue so that it looks similar to what's up in there. Now, do I want to, yeah, I'm not going to be using this as the blue anymore anyway. So let's just go ahead and add some of my orange into this mixture. Color opposite the color wheel. And so this is going to gray this down, and we'll eventually turn this into a black, but I'm going to just start with a gray. All right, so I've got this drawn in here. And I can put the grays right in on top of where the trees are as well. So let's just do that so that we know where they are. I'm wanting to have some interesting little branches sticking up in the top of that tree. It's mostly silhouette, and maybe it's going to have a few little holes in it, but not too many. And then that house is going to be behind it. And I'm going to need to put a little more orange in here because we're really using this whole batch. So what did I have my orange mixed with? It was New Gamboge, which is a orangey yellow. That's why I like using New Gamboge. It leans a little toward that egg yolk yellow. And then quinacridone rose. And then mix some of that into here. So we're getting that gray. Now remember, that you get black by having that really thick. We thin it down to get gray. So I'm working with a super thick mixture here. Okay, so we have a house. I know maybe that's a little too thick of a mixture. Let's just add a little water to that. This house here. And I'm actually seeing a glow of red on the edge. There's a window in that house I'm going to ignore. It's going to come down. It's got some darker windows in it that we can fill in later when we go to do the dark part of it. Let's just paint that across, because we know it's going to come in and fill that in there. And just to keep that from getting blossoms in it, I'm just painting over it again, because it looked like it was trying to create blossoms on me. There is another house just below this eave coming out with a little angle. It's got a rooftop. That's a car. That's the next thing I need to worry about. Everything else can just sort of go gray. And let me just fill this in, make that gray down in there. We're going to be putting black over the top of this, but this at least gives me an idea of what I'm doing with things. Now I'm going to be this car and that car the same one. There is a light fence in there, but I don't really care about that. Okay, this is going to be fairly light. I'm just going to paint around that car, even though it's going to go dark, just so I know where it is. Now I've got some trees that are right in here. And I could paint the top of this. Yeah, and this comes right and over that house. And, you know, some of the detail I care about, some of it I don't. But I'm seeing something that I really like here, and that is that the top of this is actually red. So I'm going to just drop a little red into here. And even the top of this house here is red. We're going to put dark in on top of that later, so it doesn't really matter if it's blended totally down. That edge, I wanted it to show red. And then we'll work our way into these next trees here. We're going to add a little more. Let's just make a little more of this red over here, so I've got it waiting. Ready peach. Yeah, just a tiny bit more peach into there. And there's some red up here already in those clouds. So that's part of what's going to show. And let's just, okay, so this is this big round tree here. And now let's get this gray right in on top of that. Now, there's some sky holes that are going to be visible in here. So let's leave some of these holes. Let's not paint all the way through it. And I probably should have left a few more than I did, but it's too late now. Although I'll still be able to have some medium sky holes in there. We can lift a little tiny bit. Okay, this gray. These cars. Now, this car, look at this beautiful light on the back side of that car. And the shape of it is, whoops. It's pretty dark over there. I'll be able to fix some things that I might have done imperfect on this round. But painting what's behind something is one of the best ways to have it stand out. It's a beautiful way to, and we're actually going to have some more dark here, but let me just do this so that I can identify this. Once again, there's a tire there. It's going to be a tire. So some of that's going to go darker, but now I can at least see that car where before I couldn't really see it. And then let's see this car here. Once again, it's going to go much darker back behind there. Cars are funny little things. You just have to sort of look at their shape. Forget about the fact that maybe they're a car, and just think about shapes and pay attention to what shape they are. They're sort of little rectangles. And they're, because it's coming toward us, it's a little smaller toward the back than it is toward the front. And that's that car there. The tires have got foreshortening happening on them, so they're not round, they're oval. And then my next car is driving out in the road. Those ones were parked. This next one's driving out in the road. Oh, boy, we're using up this pretty fast. I'm going to have to make more gray, huh? Now this car, I'm going to paint some of it because I want him. I don't want his headlights have got to stay. Headlights have got to stay. It's got a center there. And then he's orange on the side, so I don't want to paint this on that side. I just want to paint it on the front of the car. And then across the front down here. Okay. And then I don't like this little corner right there. Where was my clean rag? Remove that corner. Okay. That looks a little strange right now, but just wait until we get some more of this in here. Phthalo blue. Gamboge, and quinacridone rose. And I think that needs a little more gamboge in it. And just a little bit more phthalo blue. A little more phthalo blue. It's going to be very slightly green here. Get a little more quinacridone rose in there again. That'll neutral it out. There we go. Okay. So, working my way across here. We're on this car, we're on that car. We're now going to find a little bit of a house here. There's a little bit of a house. Oh, actually, I've got it drawn way over there. Okay, we'll just create some of this into something else. It's okay. We don't have to be a slave to that painting, but there is a little light space on the top of that car, and then a little light space as it comes down. And then there's a V between that and the next car. Okay. And then this is going to be all that tree stuff in there that we're going to come back and we're going to put another layer on top of here. So I'm just letting a few little sky holes stick through, but basically that's going to go away. Okay, so now I have a house shape here. And it's going to go up, and then it's going to have a hard little house shape at the top of this. That probably could have been over a little bit, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter. My next car here, and then I can maybe ignore a car or two that's on the road there. I'm probably not perfect here, but I just want to get the feeling of, you know, house, car, tree. Not necessarily getting any of them perfect. Now up here, we have these trees are kind of come down into here a little lower, and then I have a palm tree. palm trees are like big Q-tips. They've got a little fuzzy top. Or remember those old string mops? It's like an old string mop turned upwards. That's my palm tree. And then there's some other, and we're going to leave a few sky holes in here, and I'm going to put a little dark into the top of this palm tree and just let it run down in there. It's nice starting with a little red, and then it's going to get that glow on it. So you get that feeling of light coming through it. And that feels like this needs to have a little more stuff in here. And then there's a few little sky holes happening. Now, the rest of these cars, we're going to ignore that one. We're going to come back into the rest of these are just sort of little lumps on the top of them. Just little lumps on the top of them. Okay, and then that's going to go up and out of there. There's one little, and you know, I'm gonna just create a little dark space there. I think that'll be better. That's a little house shape, and then that's some plant shapes. Okay. You think I'm just making this up? Well, I am. But with a little background knowledge of what's happening. So this is all wanting to come down to here, which is pretty narrow, which is just at the beginning of this car right here. This is the top of this space. And there is one interesting tree here, which is an orangey color, orangey brown color, silhouetted up into the sky. And he's got some little bits of fronds coming off. It's like a real tall pine of some sort. Just make it a little darker there toward the bottom, and then we're going to fill in this space, and this is going to find the edge. That's the one with the lots of lights, but there's another one with lights there as well. Just find some spaces on the top of those guys. And then this is that little piece, and then this is our next car over here. We have a couple of cars that are driving away. So those cars starting to pull out of there. This car has darkness, is going to come all the way over there. It's just a narrow piece of light on the top of him there. Dark window. Narrow little piece there. And then this is going to go out into a hood. I think there's actually a couple of cars parked there, and they're sort of up against each other, but that's not what I'm going to have happen. And then let's let that go. Now, this other tree, and once again, I like this starting with the red, or at least a real red-brown. We're going to come in and do this a second time with the darker on top of it. But starting with this reddish brown allows that to become part of the tree. And just little tiny, this I think is probably an oak tree. It's got some nice broken spaces in among. And we want that one taller, but this one higher than this area here. Come in a little bit, and now it doesn't have as much glow back there, so we can start moving in toward this darker shade, and I can just add that in the bottom of what I just did. We may end up with our darkest shade here anyway, but we can come back in and darken it up even more. We need sky holes as the next little piece of this. I'm just trying to see patterns of how the branches of this, so again, this could use some red on the edge of it. I'll add it in a minute. And there's another little tree piece there. It's all coming toward a tree trunk that comes off over here somewhere. And let's just fill this in with mostly full. And then it gets pretty dark over here. There's some more cars parked alongside here, which we can let some of that stand out. There's some house shapes over here. Leave a little bit of light behind. There's a house shape there, house shape there. Nothing too detailed, but house shapes nonetheless. Now these other cars, I was going to paint grays and leave that other part behind, wasn't I? Well, what I have to do here, just take and smooth that into the side of that one car, and then let's find the second car and the wheel. And then some dark space down here in the very bottom. Let this come off into this corner. This car here, started to put it down, realized it was going to be just a wee touch too dark. Just bring that up, find the edge of that headlight. I'm going to find the bottom of this car. It's actually dark all the way across there. And then there's a reflection, so we need to let that reflection show. And then this one too, he's got a little bit of a reflection coming off of those headlights. And this car here is dark down on that side. It's a little darker on the windshield. Once I get that windshield in, then this car is going to stand out pretty well, I think. And that front grille. Might have to stop and breathe here just a little bit, turn this off, let it dry, and then come back and do the next part of this. There's a little darkness in between each one of these cars up here, and this guy's got a little darkness, and he's got a front windshield that we can put in here, and his front grille. Okay, we'll do a little bit on this one. Put his front windshield in. fence can come in there if we want. And let's just get a little bit of darkness underneath of this car. These wheels are going to be about there. These wheels are going to be about there. I'm going to stop right there, take a breather. I took a little break from this. I needed to step back and look at it, and I realized I had a problem in the painting. The cars that I had put over on the left-hand side were from the middle of the painting, and I had moved them over a little further, but left them the same size they were, which then made them look wrong. So I ended up doing a little lift in here using Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, a melamine sponge. To do that, here, let me just do a little bit more on one of these. So the sponge needs to be damp, so you want to put it in the water and then wring the water out of it. And then you can rub and really get almost down to white on here. So if I want to go a little bit lighter right in here, I can rub on this a little bit more. Try not to get too far into there or else you guys won't be able to see. And then take my rag and lift this off. Now, I'm going to have to get a little bit of pink back in there because there's this really nice pink that's on all of those cars. This one, no, it's going to go dark on that side, so that won't really matter. Maybe right in here it needs to go a little. And then while that's damp, it won't matter. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of pinkish tone in on there. I had some pinkish. Do I want that to have a purple tone to it? Do I want to have it a little? It's pinky rose. So all across through here and down into that part of that car. It's going to come down into the sides of those cars. I don't want it to get into those headlights, so we're going to leave some of the front of that car without any of it. Now, the other thing that I realized was that if I look at my photograph here and I put my ruler all the way across here, it's almost a straight line from the top of this car, and I really liked that car. So I need to then have all of these cars just about on a straight line from there. So that's going to be just great. It's going to work fine. This car, he doesn't have headlights. That one does, but it's going to go into other shades. That one goes into other shades. Okay, so that part's going to dry, and I don't want that on the top of that. I don't want that to stand out too much, so I'm going to just sort of ease that in. And this car, it's going to go darker on the front of it, so let's just take that pink all the way forward. So those cars can sit and dry, and hopefully I won't get my hand into it while I'm getting some of the darker parts put into here. So let me move this a little further up. Got a frame here, a lift to hold that up because I've got this on a little bit of a slant so that as I work it's not going to be getting in my way. So now I need to make a big puddle of black. And do I want to go with a slightly bigger brush? Maybe not. We're using phthalo blue. So I need a lot of phthalo blue. Let's just really dig a bunch out of here. Now I can either do that orange like I did before, or I could use my burnt sienna and to get this final dark. I wanted that earlier to have just a little transparency to it. The burnt sienna isn't quite as transparent as my other two colors. And the phthalo, of course, is very transparent. So now let's get a little bit of burnt sienna in here. Burnt sienna's dried a little bit today. It's a little warm, dry day. I'll let that sit in there for a minute. Let that water sit. I was working with the quinacridone rose earlier, so I think I can get some of that out pretty easy. More. As you can see, phthalo blue really is a very dark, a very strong color, and it takes, really got to get these other ones in here to get that. So as we pull this up into the side, you can sort of see what color this is. It's still quite blue, and to balance that, we need to have more of the browny orange and more red. My one other option here would have been to have squirted some paint directly out of the tube. Sometimes when I'm mixing black, that's the easier way to get enough dark paint to really get it to work. So what shade is this black? Now let me get my little tester on here. It's still pretty blue. It's still much of a navy blue. And I'm feeling like although a little bit of a navy blue isn't bad, I don't want quite that much, so I still need more burnt sienna. Let's see what I can do about getting some more out of this dry spot. And we get a little more red in there. Now that that's sat, maybe I can get some more red. And as long as my colors are real dry like this in my palette, I can come in with a dirty brush on the top of it. It's not going to hurt a darn thing. But if that was really dry, wet, damp paint, I would be getting it dirty when I came in. So am I okay with that? It's going to go on top of those reds. You know, let's just go ahead and try it. Let's see how this is going to work. So let's see, we have this house right here that I don't want to get as dark. But these trees, this tree is going to be nice and dark. And I want to just sort of get that feeling at the top of those branches, so I'm putting my brush down and then pulling it upward to get sort of little pokey feeling of a pine tree. And let's see, and that's branch there, okay. This is house here, so we're not going to paint over the top of that except for to maybe come out a little bit. And now, let's just fill this in with some bigger brush marks. I might have to mix more black before I'm done because it's going to take a fair amount of dark to fill this area. And all the way down. There's maybe another little bush that works its way over here, just about to where that car is. Isn't it nice when you get this real dark on here? It suddenly makes all that glow of that orange to stand out that much more. Now there is another little tree here. And I think I can come even a little further down here, behind the edge of another house, trees, behind the edge of a house, and dark trees, okay. And then there is a dark window right here, and this a little bit of an angle because of the perspective. It's going to sort of blend up into that tree. And there's a little window up there. There's a roof line right here, and that roof is slightly darker. Try not to lose too much of that paint. That I feel like this needs to go even a little darker than it is, but not too dark. And this roof behind. There, now that's standing out just a little bit. And then these bushes in here are just going to cover up more of that. There's some shutters on that, which are sort of interesting. Let me just bring that right up onto that window. And now, that car is where our car position, but we're doing this other car back here. So it's got to be bigger. All right. And then I'm not going to worry about too much of this other detail. I just wanted a feeling of house back in there. I'm not going to worry about that fence that's back. There's actually a fence back in there, but once again, I think we're going to just ignore that because I want to move along a little bit here. Now, remember, we have to have all those rooftops at about the same place up there. And maybe this one is going to be, cut that a little more there. And this little guy, I'm going to make him a little shorter right there. They're angling down here straight and then angled back. So this is this car here. It's going to go across. It's going to find yourself here, find the edge of that. And then let's get this quickly built back up into some darks up in here. I'll come work on those cars some more later. That's a little bit of house there. Sort of like a little feeling of some house. And then we're going to come up and we're going to find these trees. And we're going to leave a little bit of that beautiful red that I had. And we're going to leave some sky holes. And it's just holes, gotta leave some holes in there. And maybe this tree comes out here just a little more like that. Sky holes, sky holes. Remember sky holes. It's easy to forget them and just keep painting over the top of them, but we want some of those sky holes. And then this comes down, and there's a feeling of a little bit of, maybe that's a tree trunk, okay. Maybe some house stuff there that is a little lighter, and let's just leave it sort of square looking. And actually left a little house there, but I'm going to change it just a little. Now, you still have to be at about that same height. This guy can come down a little bit. That one is a little above. That can come down a little bit. And there. Okay, now take that up into there. Let that be a house shape. Let that be sort of a house shape there. And this palm tree, remember that gorgeous palm tree? I don't want to lose that really pretty dark edge that was on it. Some nice things that were happening there. And I just want to keep a little bit of and then let's see here. That tree, this one, those are all going to just sort of stay that red. And as this gets a little further away, this is not quite as dark back in here. So I think I have to be careful about getting that too dark. Just get a little tiny bit of water on my brush so that I won't have that quite as dark. And that little white spot shouldn't be so white. Okay. Now let's come in and get some more dark into this tree. And he also, his sky holes are beautiful. And that little red edge is really nice. So I'm just coming in with the tip of my brush. I possibly could try sponging on this, although the tip of the brush is working fairly well here. Gotta keep my head out of here. And my tendency is to want to pull in and get really close to this as I'm painting so I can see my details. But in actuality, I'm probably better off standing back a little bit because then I can be a little freer with my brush. And we're just make sure that we come in and we're just nice around this car. I can see a little bit more of this side of the car. And maybe that feels better, yeah. And then there was another car back here. Let's just let him stand out a little bit more with some of that paint. Yeah, there. And maybe he's got a tire right there, okay. And you know, there was some house shapes over in here, but I'm gonna just ignore them. I think we're better off to not fuss with any of that. You know, looking at this, when I took my little break, I like to, when I'm working on something this complex in particular, stop partway through it, stand back 6-8 feet, look at it. And when I do, I can see things like this mistake that I had in the in how the pieces were working. And let's see, we have a bumper that runs across here, and another wheel, and then there's going to be light that runs in underneath of there. So that was another mistake that I had. I made that too dark underneath of there, and that wasn't looking good. And there's going to be the other tire wheel up there somewhere, and then there's shadows that run in underneath of there. So let's let that happen. Maybe that is isn't quite so dark. And this also has shadows underneath of it. Okay, so now, the other thing I didn't like was this should not have been, and maybe Mr. Clean Magic Eraser will help here. The problem with Mr. Clean Magic Eraser is it's hard to have real fine detail. But that dark, once again, this needs to come, my angle here needs to come out of this from back there down into here. So that needs to be my angle, which means I did this wrong as well. So let's just do a little lift here. And that car, anyway, he needs to, yeah. It's got to come up and get a darker side down in there. And then it's going to be dark across the top of this. And maybe that shape is going to be a little more squared there. Dark, a little lighter, and then dark all the way across the front of that thing. Bring this over even a little bit further. There we go. That's starting to feel better. Now this one, his front windshield is quite a bit of this, and it's going to go over into there further. It's going to be a little bit lighter on the top of his hood. His headlights are going to stand out. Funny little boxes. And I see one thing that I don't like. That angle there should have come in more like that. And then maybe a little more off of that. Another windshield across here. And the front grille. And then the side of this car is a little bit darker, and then there's dark back behind it. And then we're going to be pretty dark right underneath of this car right here. And then we have those reflections that are coming down. It's underneath of here where those tires are, that's darker, and here's a wheel right there. bright enough. This one has headlights in here, but they're not standing out very much because they're not turned on. I assume that that car is maybe parked. And we need some tires underneath here, and probably the feeling of something under there. That's actually pretty dark all the way underneath of there. Just let that be. And this car now needs a darker front on it. And let's get this windshield working. And that comes out here a little further. And that's where this tire is. Now they look a little better. A little better. And this one have a dark front on it right there, and this one can have a dark front on it right here. The reflections of those, clean spot of the headlights down here. Nope, it's not gonna work. Just get out of there, Margaret. Get out of there. Now we're gonna have that dripping all the way down in there, and I don't want that. Dry that. One other little place of dark in here is what's going on with these cars. And remember, they are on the same line as this set there. So I need to be down in here. The car somewhere here with headlights. Oh, and that we need to paint it orange. The little glow of those two headlights there. How about that? And then let's soften the edges of that so that they glow down there. All of these need to be a little bit darker. A little bit, not that much. And a little darker right between these headlights, between those headlights. A little darker underneath of that set of headlights. Okay. And I think, other than that, this car looks a little strange. Oh, I know what's wrong. I made this hood a little too narrow. And I don't know if I can fix it right now or not. Trying not to get into that lower area, which was a little bit damp. Just want a little more definition here. Yeah, that's going to help that. And same with these two headlights, maybe just a little more around them. Oh, once that dries, it's got to be dry. Okay, let it dry. Let it dry. And then this window be darker.